Bulavanaka and Mahaloni. My name is Emele Ugavule, and this recording is taking place on the lands and waterways of the Binjarab Noongar of the Bibbulmun Nation. I pay my deepest respects to their elders, past, present, and future, and through them extend all of my deepest respects and solidarity to all Aboriginal and Xenothic peoples who are watching in today from wherever you are. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. It is my deepest privilege to facilitate this digital forum on behalf of the Curu Mai digital forum for the public program that is accompanying Salote Tawale's I Don't See Colour exhibition, the Perth Institute of Contemporary Art. And today we are speaking with three amazing storytellers, researchers, iTaukei artists, each in their own right, who are practicing what it means to explore and speak to the uniqueness of vakaviti, the Fijian worldview, in their creative practice. And today we're going to be talking about how each of them delve into looking at the uniqueness of the way that Fijians tell stories, express Fijian stories through illustration, through animation, through visual art, and through archives, and also in relation to the museums. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to start in the corner with Teresi.
Okay, Nakavakalevo Emele, and thank you so much to Salote and Tui for being part of this awesome talanoa session. So to introduce myself, my name is Teresi Bunindilo, and I'm originally from the beautiful island of Kandavu. I'm also Vasu to Kandavu. My mom and dad are both from the southern part of Fiji. My family and I live in Hawaii, and I work as an assistant professor in the anthropology department at the University of Hawaii.
Inaka Teresi. I'm going to move over next to Tui.
My name is I'm based in the Fiji Islands at the moment. I'm an illustrator. I've just last week I started with SDC in Noumea, so I'm moving to New Caledonia, which is why things are all up in the air and everything. And yeah, so I'm married to a beautiful woman from Tuvalu. Then I found out later so yeah, it's I have three cheeky, noisy kids. I have kids who are oversized, over loud, and but love them to bits. I feel very blessed to be able to work in the Pacific to do the kind of work I do, and yeah, I just love where we are, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys today.
And last but not least, our amazing Salote. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself again in the context of the conversation. Naka. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, that was the best opening I've ever done. Anyway, Bula everyone, I'm so pleased to be here with you for this talanoa. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Ora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. I'm just grateful to be here in Sydney, and I'm from Rawa, Northo, And yeah, I'm an artist and also a lecturer at the University of Sydney, at Sydney College of the Arts, Sydney College of the Arts. And I'm an artist foremost, and I make work about actually being Fijian, but also living in Australia. Thank you. Thank you, Emele.
Inaka Salote. And lastly, for those of you who don't know me, as I said, my name is Emele. I am Tokelauan and Fijian. My mother is from the village of Nukunonu in Tokelau, and my father is from the village of Sauni Veoto in Teumba. And so today we are looking at the topic of Rai Vakaviti, memory recount through the iTaukei worldview. So what is unique to the way that iTaukei tells stories, how we interpret stories, and how we communicate memory through archives, visual art, and storytelling. And we're going to touch on themes relating to genealogy, accessibility, and sustainability, but also I want to hear about these amazing people and their practice. And so we're going to dive into some specific projects that each of them are working on currently. So I'm going to start with Teresi, and we're going to shoot straight over to beautiful Kandavul. Teresi, you recently wrote a paper about Rai Vakaviti and the Indigenous worldview. And I wanted to ask you, what do you believe is unique about the way Fijian stories are captured in museums and archives? And what are some challenges that you face through this process?
Okay, Emele, yes. Ever since I joined the museum field, this goes back to 1994. When I first worked at the Fiji Museum. Yes, I found that, there's kind of a huge gap between museums and our Fijian community. They kind of like run parallel to each other, but I can see similarities between how museums are run, as well as how Fijian communities do their their day-to-day life. So first of all, one of my own personal observation, if I can start with the challenges in museums, I noticed that when it comes to museums, it's kind of like sort of moving towards individualism, which is totally the opposite of what Fijians are known for, which is to do with collectivism. We work together. So that's a huge difference. For example, when you go to museums and it's collected by a person who visited a place, and everything is written or recorded against the name of a person. But when you switch it, when it goes to our Fijian people in our community, it's actually reflecting our Yavusa or our Nua. It's that collective identity, which I find to be quite contrasting. So that's the first and foremost observation that I made. The other challenge I face as well in museums are how the information are recorded. Most of the time it's just like generic. When you go into the collection store, it just says War Clubs Fiji, or Baskets Fiji, or Pots Lao. Lucky if we have a name of a province. Usually it's just generic. But then in converse to to what I experience in a museum, in our Vakavanua way of doing things, we don't do it that way. Even just how we've just introduced ourselves, we go back to our koro, we go back to our, matangali and our yabusa. And so the point I want to say is that names are so important, which is missing in many museums and archives and libraries. And that's something that I wanna, bring to the table, that identity, I think it's very important to us as a people, knowing somebody's name, even sharing your own name, because your name has so much power and so much history in it. And therefore, it's very important for us as iTaukei, to talk more about it and have that conversation. So to answer that question again or summarize it, Emele, I come to 3 C's that I want to share. Number 1 is collective work, like we work together. 2, we always try to connect. We want to connect with another person. And number 3, we always engage in conversation. So we always want to talk and make that links amongst ourselves. So those are just some observations that I want to share, Emele, in terms of my life as a Maramaniviti, working in the museums and my observations that I see.
Inaka Tsurisi, some really, really amazing insights that you have there in relation to like the institution and memory recount versus the community. And I think that actually that's universal. It's not just in relation to the museums, but that's definitely something that I see in my practice in the performing arts and institutions, and the obsession with ownership or, like the importance of names, yes, but in relation to like singular names rather than acknowledging the collective, that come together or contribute to a work. And yeah, what your summary of like the 3 C's at the end there was really, really beautiful. And I think something that I really loved that you brought up was also the importance of like a name as an archive, and how lineage really is an embodiment of all of those, like through your name, an embodiment of all of those who have come before you. For example, like my son, he's named after his grandfather and his great-great-grandfather and his great, like that for us is really important. So like a way to honor and keep alive the memory of those people. So thank you for raising that, Teresi. That's a really beautiful way to start our discussion. I'm going to go over to Tui now, and I want to say, Tui, your illustration work is really distinctive and magnetizing. I really love your style of drawing. It's very, very unique, particularly in the Fijian landscape. And I wanted to ask, like, why were you drawn to this style of illustration and animation as your medium for storytelling?
Vinaka. So I grew up and I watched a lot of cartoons and I read a lot of comics. And I just loved movement. So as a kid, I wasn't somebody who was interested in music. I loved watching how things moved, how things created, and like from an early age. So my father was one of the people who were enrolled in Her Majesty's Armed Forces in the 60s. So I grew up in the UK, illustrations, but when we moved back to Fiji, I realized a lot of the kids, well, all of us, when we draw, we would always draw people who look like they were in comics that we read, like Spider-Man or Essex. So for validation, you would never draw somebody who looked local. And I learned that, so even with young artists that I work with, I realized that a lot of times they put them wearing closed shoes, they're wearing long trousers, they do not wear the clothes that we see people wear around us. So there was always that disconnect. So when I started doing illustration, I tried to make my things, like all my illustrations, as local as possible. I wanted to, and when my drawings were out, and it was the people that we see every day, a lot of people couldn't understand, thought that if you're going to produce work at a certain standard, it must have been done overseas. It must have been created by somebody abroad. And I was trying to tell people that no, we have all the abilities to do that here. And it's just being confident in telling our story. So when I've done work with regional organizations, with local organizations, I try and make people look the way, look like us. Because there's so many times when I've had to draw manuals, when I go through their previous illustrations, and they just have work. They've got images from the Caribbean, images from Indonesia, because they don't have anything from the Pacific. And I really love our colors, our body language when we're talking to each other, and the way we interact with each other, and it changes from culture to culture. And I try to capture that, and just to encourage, our children, that you don't have to look like you're from overseas to be valid. We have so much inspiration and beauty right here, right in front of us. But we spend so many times looking on the screen and looking on our phones. But when everybody on the outside are looking, are on their phones and on their screens, looking at us and the beauty that we have right here. And that's what I want to share with, want to open our eyes about, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, please stop me if I talk too long, because man, when I start talking about drawings, I go on and on and on, because it's something I love. It's I'm not doing this to get rich. I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it, and I feel that that there's so many people who have talents that they push. You need to do accounting or medicine or become a lawyer to be valued. Whereas the fisheries, arts, there's so many things that we already do, agriculture, that we already do traditionally, that is valid. You don't have to go out to learn all these different things. Just concentrate on what we have. And yeah, that's what I want to encourage our children. Find out what you love and pursue that, and not half-heartedly, wholeheartedly, with education, with experience, and hone your craft. Be the best that you can be. Stop there. Sorry.
Yeah, Vinakatsui, some really beautiful and motivational points there. I think what you said about like looking at what we do traditionally as Fijians, being part of our everyday life, with arts is really important. Like your practice, seeing your practice as an extension of a legacy that already exists, that, and also as an extension of what's already happening in your community around you, is really, like, I think that's really key. And it's also hard to kind of wrap our heads around. Sometimes I feel personally that often, because storytelling is so normalized for our communities, in our homes, it's so normal. We see it everywhere when we go to Lotu, when we're having a celebration. That's why it's hard for some generations to make the leap between it being something that we do in our home space to then being something that we do professionally. And that's why there's this competition that happens between career and industry and profession. But what you were talking about in relation to the local, and, like not only speaking to a practice that already exists, but representing the local through your illustration is really powerful. I love illustration. I love, in particular, Fijian. There's a lot of Fijian illustrators that I follow who are diaspora and back home. And I think that that is really, really rare, like on the illustration landscape, definitely in children's literature, like finding Fijian illustrators and animators who draw Fijians that look like Fijians. And there is no, like, Fijians all look, there's we're not a monolith. We all look very different. Like all four of us right now look very different, So representing that, not just in how we look today in 2021, but over the course of history, is also really, really important for, as Teresi said, our sense of identity and how we see ourselves and how we imagine ourselves in the future. So Minaka Tsui, I really appreciate that. I want to just dive a little bit deeper into a project that you're already working on, which is an animation project with an all-local team in Fiji called Soli Mula. I was wondering if you could tell us about the genesis of this work and share any discoveries you've made through working with an all-Fijian creative team.
Oh, yeah. So Solibula is a project pushed by Meli. Meli has spoken to Dr. Tarishi. It's like I admire Meli. He hasn't, for so many of us illustrators and animators, we wait for jobs to drop in our lap. What Meli did, he put this up and started a Kickstarter account, and people basically just gave us money to be able to do this animation project. And what Meli is doing, so it's yeah, Meli Tungata, Clarence Das, Michael Light, Dave Lavaki, and we've got Inoke Kolonisina, and I mean there are other people involved, but yeah, we're just you know, it's just having a, you know, a bowl of grog, a couple of beers, and just talking about a story. Because when we tell stories, you know, when Fijians tell stories, there's a lot of sound effects. Like sound effects make up can be a good 70% of the story, and the dialogue is you know, just secondary. It just gets you know, carries the story along. So with the animation, it was pretty much just about thinking, okay, what if this happened, or what if you know, if missionaries didn't come to Fiji? What if because people are always complaining about, oh, you know, things are this way because of deals that happen down the road, and we were just it's just a what if, and but working um, with our traditional stories, it can be quite sensitive because with traditional stories there's ownership, and there are people that you have to ask you know, permission for when you are telling stories, and even when you're representing things. So the best way around it was and it just so happens other mediums are doing it. It was sort of an alternate a parallel universe where, you know, what would happen if we launched canoes, you know, now the way we launched canoes before, the way things were recorded, and because a lot of that information, a lot of the history we have, but it's somebody else's story, and we've learned that the way we do things aren't set. Things evolve. Like even now, our language changes, our customs change. And then, so the further back we go in history, like going through archives and things, and you see things that the Fijians did traditionally that were different from what we're accustomed to. We think, oh, that's not really Fijian. No, we didn't do it. But yeah, we had such a diverse you know, a diverse like artifacts. Our art was very, you know, we had so many different hairstyles. So those are things that we want to play around with animation. And animation, it's just, we love the fact that it's like I'm drawing into Rack, and Meli's in Nambua, and then Michael is in Wailikutu. Michael, David, and Knox, they're all together on that side. And we're just drawing and sharing stuff, you know, online with, you know, free, using free platforms. I just email it to him, and we're able to produce an animation where people can watch, and it's just a story. It's just a different way of telling, you know, a story. It's a yarn, and I love the fact that we can do it here. So I'm enjoying working with with these guys, and I think Nelly just has to crack the whip because we're all friends. So oh, sorry, this thing hasn't been done yet, and then he's trying to look angry and trying not to laugh at us while he's looking at us on over Zoom. But yeah, I mean, this is this is a process, and it's great to be doing it with your friends.
Nakatui, some really important things there in relation to, I think, just like protocol and what that looks like. And when you're dealing with, obviously, because you're reaching back into the past to imagine the future, right? So you're using the history of like you said, like cultural artifacts or certain traditions to imagine like what if, and so I'm really excited to see what the final product will look like, and how you've all tackled that. And what you said about 70% of a conversation being sound effects really like touched my heart because that's so real. I think like thinking about the way like an important part of our storytelling, like even though conversation and dialogue is a huge part of that, how that happens is really important to think about and really distinct, like the amount of sounds you said that people make, the different types of sounds that people make in response to discoveries, in response to like agreeing with someone or disagreeing with someone, that are really unique to the Fijian vernacular, I think is really beautiful, and a really amazing point. And I'm really interested to see how that appears in your animation. But also this idea of culture evolving, right? Like Salote and I talk about that, like it's fluid, and there are a lot of things that we hold on to over the years and that still maintain their integrity, but evolve, you know, like, and adapt because the world around us is adapting, and Fijians are migrating and moving all over the world. And so that's, I think, really, really an important thing for our audiences to, for those of who are watching in, to remember that culture is, or tradition and contemporary culture, whatever it is, however it is expressed, it's always fluid, but it's always in conversation, you know, it's always speaking to itself. So I'm going to go over to Salote now. And Salote, we've spoken previously in your artist talk about I Don't See Color. And in that conversation, you spoke about how it traced its roots to your personal journey of collecting archives and your practice as well. That's a really important part of your practice. And I wanted to ask, like, what lessons have you learned from working with family archives in creative practice?
I've learned a lot, actually. It's true, like Fijians speak about being Fijian, and you know, everything actually everyone said has resonated so much with me, especially Teresa, you first were talking about names, and through that kind of names coming up again as we go down the generations, the stories are kept that are associated from those names. And so actually from personal and family archives, I've learned a lot about my family, but also I think when we've sat and talked together, we've all learned, and everybody's holding that story collectively, but taking the opportunity to share that and learn the things that we don't already know. But also, I was just thinking, if I just digress from that a little bit, about I so love to hear that your project is like delving into history, but you do that as you guys are now as friends making this work. And it does make me think about what Teresa said earlier about the missing names in the archives, because that always, when I went through this journey of looking at personal archives, and I was fortunate to be able to do that whilst looking at archives in the Fiji Museum at Cambridge. You know, they have that large collection of Fijian things, and in that imagery, it was that those missing names where you're looking at these images, maybe, you know, people standing on a bilibili, or even the ones where they're in the studio, and they, you know, a person's name isn't given, and then also you don't know where they're from, and you know, there's some other kind of information given by this singular collector who didn't collect that information. But in that archive record, there's a lot about them and what they were doing when they archived this picture, but not who and where they came from. And so, you know, I make work about that as well. It's like, is this person someone we're related to, that I'm related to? Like, oh, this face looks like, my grandfather, or, someone in the village, and it's on that side of the island. So maybe, maybe I'm related to them. And so I think I find this project that Tui is doing and Teresa's project as combating the way our histories are recorded, and also using the evidence that we have in personal archives, but also the things that are kept to to produce more information. I'm always not produce more information, just more conversation, more talanoa about who we are in relation to who we were. And I feel really kind of blessed to have been able to go and see these archives and see them with Fijian people as well. There's nothing like going into an older archive without someone, a knowledge holder, but also like family stories and family names. I mean, even the cursed name continues in the next generations, and just that keeps that story. I find that amazing as well. Yeah.
Naka Salote, I loved what you shared about, just going back to that point about names and the importance of names. Actually, one of my friends the other day sent me an article, I think I want to say it was from 2020, or might have been a bit older, about a man with the longest name in Fiji, and how his name, he mentioned in the interview that he was named he was given the longest name to beat his tau in Vanu level, who had the longest name, which I think is really powerful and beautiful. And the meaning of his name is also really interesting, but just like that in itself speaks to an ongoing like relationship, right? Like the Tauvu relationship, informing him and his naming legacy as a result, is a really beautiful and unique, I would say, Fijian practice. But also like how you were speaking on collective memory, reiterating knowledge, like how the being together and like sharing a story helps remind other people of their knowledge and how much they know. I think that's something that's really beautiful and really important, and definitely something that I remember. I think we spoke about this, about like the Maramandina workshops, how there were aunties, Danita's aunties, or one of her aunties, who was sitting in the workshops and through that process, sharing a lot and realizing how much she shared. And there is like in that process, an affirmation of your knowledge, which I think is really important sometimes in isolation, when you're busy working a 9 to 5, or you're not around your community all the time in the same way you would be if you were back home. It's hard to remember, or you just easily forget how much you know, and how much what I see with storytellers, when stories unlock in people, like how much they love what they know, how much they love talking about Fijian culture and about their families and their family histories.
I think Teresi really egged that on as well, creating those situations for ourselves, but especially I think you were so good at, like, a lot of those aunties came along just saying like, oh, I don't know anything, I'll just do some cooking. But then Teresi started this conversation, and then everyone's putting their 2 cents in, and everyone's on Facebook asking family, going back to Fiji, like, oh, what's this, just to kind of because a lot of the thing that you taught us, I think, Teresi, is that to do any kind of be a part of any kind of ceremony or anything, you have to know who you are, where you're from, your vastu, all these things, like, the order, collection of the mats, the order of the mats, that kind of thing. But also just, Tui, you mentioned something about hairstyles, and that also made me think about that research and how, like, in the past, so you would know who somebody was a lot, based on a lot on their hairstyles and their how they were dressed. Is this true? Or I think that was what I found.
I've like with Solimbula, we've had to go through, to get reference pictures, and the hairstyles are outrageous. It's just
amazing.
It's amazing.
They're
like,
amazing.
And I don't I couldn't find any information on the on why people I don't know if it was, but what I'd read, because like exactly what you're saying, is that the experts that I read are observers, because I mean the experts are not the people. The experts are the people who've observed and written it down in books. So that, yeah, it's that. I don't know. I've tried. I've spoken to. There's we talk a lot with Mr. Simeone Silvendre from iTaukei Trust Board, and we get try and get as much information out of him as possible. But we just have to keep. Just sorry, carry on.
Oh no, I was going to say, like, I think you're absolutely right. You making this animation, Teresi writing your paper, hopefully a book, hopefully a lot more things, you know, is going to really change the way that we as Fijians who do not know that information have access to that in the right way. Because at the moment, we interpret the archive the way that the singular voice collected it and determined what would be important and maybe wrote down the wrong information, you know, that kind of thing.
And I think that that's also, there's something kind of worth noting there as well, which is that interpretation is, it's not just about like the preservation of knowledge and the communication of that and those memories, but how it's interpreted is really important as well. And that's why going back to like vakaviti, like the uniqueness of how we see the world as Fijians and our relationship with Vanua is really is key to how we interpret these stories, right? And how we make sense of that in order to communicate that. I want to I was gonna go to Salote, but I'm going to, while we're on that topic, go to Teresi. Teresi, in your paper on Orai Vakaviti, you talk about your framework that you created, a research framework called the Veivosaki framework. And I was wondering if you could share a bit with us about that framework and how you implement that framework in your practice, but also how you observe that happening in Fijian communities.
Yes, yeah, when I came up with that, research framework, I was basing it on my own personal experience. Because when I was doing my research and I was talking to people, all the Fijians in the UK, in Canada, in Europe, and back in Fiji and in New Zealand, I noticed that the fundamental, key factor that connects all of us was this conversation. It was the Veivosaki was so key for me in order for me to get the information that I need for my research. So one thing I also saw that the conversation was more than one way. It was two-way or three or four, different ways of conversing. And so when I came up with the Veivosaki framework, I realized that the Veivosaki was above the Vevakani. So the root of everything is relationship. Because I remember when I was in England and in Canada, before I even start my interview, they wanted to know who I was. But one thing that was weird too was there were people I didn't expect to interview, but because they knew I was doing this, it was through this network of people. Immediately I started getting emails and saying, Teresa, you should talk to so-and-so because she's from here and she's related to you. It's that kind of connection. And it was so beautiful. And I saw this like moved organically. And I was like, this is amazing. And so that's when I realized that this network of Vevakani was still entrenched in us. Whether you live in Alaska, Greenland, or Antarctica, we still have that link. And that was so beautiful. And that's why I decided I have to write about it. And so the Veivosaki is above Vevakani. And then next to vevasaki is vekilai and verongrongoi. So vekilai means, when you start conversing, you're starting to get to know the other person. So that gap is now being reduced. And then verongrongoi, even though we are conversing, I noticed too, the Fijians are also really good in observing these non-verbal communications. and we are very observant to just little body language. And also we are really good at this, by hearing the information or hearing somebody mention a word, immediately this vault of, and I just thought that, if I can capture it in a framework that maybe future researchers, younger up and coming research can use it and maybe add to it, that will be really, really beautiful. And so, yeah, that's how, I came up with this vevasaki, framework, because I realized that was the key element of wanting to know something. So you need to know the other person, you need to speak to the other person, and you need to listen to the other person. And so that's when I realized that from my iTaukei way of doing things, it really involves all our senses and more. So that was kind of like make me realize how important it is to be connected to our iTaukei identity and be proud of it, because I know through the years I've noticed people that I know have kind of like discounted or kind of said, oh, that vakaviti way of doing things, that's in the olden days, don't bring it, this is this. But I'm always like, no, I'm always saying to people, it's not. Remember, they survived with this knowledge for thousands of years, and we are living with this knowledge for over 100 years. Do your math. And that's when people, like, the penny drops and they realize, oh, wow, that's right, 1,000 versus 100. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I just thought I shared that, kind of info just to make this knowing ourselves as iTaukei as a privilege, and we should count the blessing that we are from this beautiful place, called Viti.
Naka Tsuisi, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think what you said, that framework is so beautiful, and I love that it came organically out of your lived experience, and in particular, like what you said about how Fijians are really good at observing nonverbal communication. Like, as you said that, I was thinking about Unaisi Nambombo Mbaba's work, Knowing and Learning, and how she speaks on silence and build that framework on the taxonomy of silence and the different ways that Fijians embody silence. And I've had conversations with different Fijians over the last year, in particular Isabella and Manduki, and we talk about just listening and what it looks like. And I'm really glad so far everyone's spoken on how conversation is really important and talking is really important, but also like a really key aspect of that is listening, right? And you spoke about that. So I'm really happy that you spoke about that. And also, yeah, absolutely, it's a privilege to know about our iTaukei culture and learn about that and be proud of that. So thank you for being a champion of our culture and our language. It's really inspiring. I wanted to ask you one more question in relation to your practice, because when I first met you and we had conversations, it was in relation to your practice in archaeology. And I remember you telling me about when you went out to Singatoka and you worked in the sand dunes there with the lapita pottery that had been uncovered through your work with the Fijian Museum. And so I'm wondering, like, for the very little that I know about lapita pottery, it does kind of uncover these stories of migration across the Pacific for Pacific people. And so I'm wondering, for you and your experience, like, what do you believe is the relationship between archaeology and stories through the Rai Vakaviti lens?
Yes, Nakamile. Yes, a very good question. I when I first started in the field of archaeology, I went down the, sort of that mainstream Western framework of learning. And I knew this was a field of work that was very new to us in Fiji, and I was being sent by the government to go to Australia and study more about it and bring it back home and try and learn more about our past through archaeology. And when I returned, I think I came back changed in the way I look at the world, because I started to value the oral history as well. Because before I left to go to Australia, I was so excited about learning this new way of understanding the past. And I know archaeology is, a very Western way of, history, studying history. But then when I came back, I have a more deeper appreciation of iTaukei Macau. And with our archaeological work that we do in Fiji, before we go to any archaeological sites, we always talk to the people, the iTaukei or Tauke Ringele, and we collect all the talanoa Macau, iTaukei Macau, all the migration stories. And so in my master's thesis, I realized that archaeology and oral history, they should be put on the same pedestal. Because when I was in the archaeology field, it seems to be like this archaeology up here, and all our oral history and everything is done here. And then when we were writing our archaeological reports, it was like we write what we found, like the lapidar pottery, the human remains, and everything else. And then when it's time to fill in the gaps, and then you reach to these stories to fill in the gap. So when I wrote my master's thesis, I decided to challenge that and realize that this oral history is a core part of archaeology. Without oral history, archaeology won't be complete. So these two, they should work hand in hand. And that's been like something I've been championing, all along, to value our stories. And I see this huge compliment. So when it comes to pottery, the lapidar pottery, dates back to 3,000 years ago. And it talks about, human settlement going back to 1290 BC. And so when you fast forward to today, we still have women in Lawai, in Nandronga, in Nakambuta, still making pottery. And you go to Vanuatu, you go to Solomon Islands, you go to Papua New Guinea, the tradition is still alive. And that's when I realized that, wow, archaeology gives us these 3,000 years of radiocarbon dating that connects us back to 3,000 years ago. But then when you look at today's communities, the women who were making the very same pot that is 3,000 years ago are still alive today. And the knowledge is still there. And that's when I just value, the work I was doing at the Fiji Museum more than I was when I started. And that's when I wanted to share with our younger generations, to let them know that archaeology, even though it's a Western way of looking at the world in the past, but with oral history, they complement each other. And to me, that's something that we should value even more, not just one side of the research aspect, but also our own talanoa and our own tukuni. So so that was my my experience of working at the Salote Tawale. That was my first archaeological field trip, working under the sun for 5 weeks. It was a very amazing experience, but I'll never forget that experience of working there. But I realized that it's my job now, to share those of my own experiences so that the younger ones can value both archaeology and through the lapidar pottery, but also value their iTaukei Macau.
I think that's a really important thing definitely for anyone listening, and to just remember and also affirm that our oral histories are really, really important, and just as important, if not more important, than the way that Western institutions preserve and tell stories, because they do speak uniquely to our worldviews and our histories. And as you said, that are specific to us and how we move through the world. As you were speaking, I was thinking about what Salote was saying about the generations, and how taking an elder with you to the archives was a really important, that changed your experience of how you interpreted and understood the archives. And I see that in the work that you're doing, Teresi, and that it's very different for a young person to come across, you know, these archaeological remains or these stories by themselves, as opposed to coming across it with someone like yourself, a knowledge holder who understands, you know, and is able to read and interpret the meaning of these cultural artifacts, and that intergenerational link and exchange of knowledge is really, really important. You know, it's not just about or anybody, you know, in a space together collectively. It's like, it's really important that it's across generations to maintain and preserve that knowledge. So yeah, thank you, Vinaka, so much for your work. I really, really appreciate that. I'm going to move on to our final question, and this is for everyone. And the question is, what is one thing that you love, like you personally really, really love, you feel your spirit called to? And it can be something that you've spoken about before, about the way that iTaukei tell stories. And I'm going to go back to Salote.
I was like, oh, not me first. I actually just love the way a story can be told by a number of people at once. And like, you know, people have it's true, like Fijians are very good at conversation, or very good at like, you know, every kind of ceremony has a lot of things that have to be said, and, you know, but I guess my experience with my family has been sitting down and hearing the different angles of the story. And for me, that's very gripping. For us, we would like, you know, sharing, like having all these different things being said, and then you learn something new, and then somebody else pieces that together. That was my kind of thing. But also, I think in the way that stories can be told with objects. So like seeing, going and seeing things in objects in archives, and seeing how like it tells, looking at an object that was made by Fijians a long time ago, tells a different story than I would have imagined. It was like really sparked a lot of, I felt really animated, sorry to use that term to you, but I felt very animated looking at the skill of, you know, adornments, or looking at the skill in a club, that is the way the design on a club, and how that, although I might not know exactly what that story is, it's just the way that it is made really just kind of speaks something. That's where I think also taking somebody with you, so you can, you know, have a conversation about what it is you're looking at and what you're in the presence of, really kind of would open that up more. But yeah, the story that the objects tell.
Vinaka, Salote, yeah, I resonate with both of those. I really, I love that.
And if, yeah,
go ahead.
I'll just quickly mention, because like at the moment we're making a bili for the APT. It will be in Brisbane, and I'm working with some, because I can't go there, we're in lockdown here in Sydney, but it really needed Fijian hands to make that, and people using their own experience. We've got Jonah and Suliasi who are making that. It's about 13.5 meters long, but what was amazing is that the stories that are coming out of as we make this together, I mean, me on the screen, but like, you know, of being in the village, and like, you know how we're talking about culture always changing, you know, the job that you did as a kid when you lived in the village is different from maybe the job you do now as an adult, and being able to relive and remember that has been just, I like that form of storytelling as well. That's an object, but that's hands and that's memory.
Yeah, the embodiment of storytelling, like the way that it sits in our flesh is, yeah, really beautiful. And also, yeah, I love that. I resonate with that. And so, yeah, and thank you for sharing about your mili as well. I can't wait to see it in person when borders open and we can move around. Tui, what is one thing that you love about the way iTaukei tells stories?
Yeah, I love I have a friend um, who would tell stories, and it looks really silly, but it's like if you were to write down the script, it would have been a very short story, because his thing was always like, oh, you know, last night I was sleeping, and he's like that. And then I heard all these people yelling, and then what's going on? He was like, ah! And then so I woke up, and it's like, I woke up, you know, he'll have to act out everything out. And that's how we tell stories. I mean, if you're just listening, if you like, you can't just do a podcast of these things, you have to watch, you know. And he said, oh, and then it was, yeah, we were in school, and like to this day, I still remember it, because he said, man, and I ran to the window and I looked out, and there was a house on fire. He lives at the police barracks. And the rest of the story was, and he finished off the story, and it was just sound effects and gestures. Yeah? So I looked out and I saw that, you know, the house was on fire. So we just went and we watched. So the rest of the story was, and you know, we're sitting in class and nobody does anything, because that's normal, you know. And it's only when you're older, and then you know, and I went and I was trying to explain this story. I said, oh man, this is totally foreign for some people. But I love that when we tell stories, we fully immerse ourselves in the story. Like, it's not about the words, it's the actions, it's the sounds, and that's how we tell stories with each other. Like, it's never a quiet affair. Like, if my mother's telling stories with her sisters, like, she's talking like they're standing on opposite sides of the room when they're right next to each other, you know, because it's the hands are going, and then, you know, then they're imitating other people, you know, when they're talking. But it's that, and it's lost when we write it down in books. I mean, there are people who are very talented, and they can observe and record all these gestures in words. But that's what I love about with comic books and with animation. You can put in all these gestures, the sound effects. I did some stuff for iTaukei, like a Fijian comic, and when I sent it back, and they asked me, oh, can you, because I think a vundi peel was thrown at a mouse and it landed and it just went splotch. And the feedback I got was, oh, could you give a Fijian sound effect? I don't know how to spell a Fijian sound effect, but we just put boo or something like that. But that's what I love about Fijian stories. I mean, there's energy. I love the energy. I mean, depending on what the story is, but for me, I love that. It's never just a straightforward story. There's always somebody being a bit cheeky, and they'll always tweak it, slightly. It's never the same story, depending on who's telling the story and who they're talking to. When it comes to stories, they don't let truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, wow.
I love the cheeky. I love what you're talking about cheeky and the emotion of it. It just took me back to listening to my aunties talk to each other and tell each other stories while cooking, and just the sheer emotion.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're talking so fast I just couldn't understand what was, and I'd be like, what's happening? And it would just be a simple story that's with the embellishments.
Yeah, but the embellishments are, I think, like what you were speaking to there, Tui, I'm just gonna extend on a little bit because it speaks to my practice. Like the way that Fijians tell stories and like blur time, like it's definitely, I think, very unique in that the movement between being the narrator and the observer and being the person, who's experiencing the story that they're telling, or the multiple characters within the story, and the voices and the intonation, and as you said, the energy, the transference of energy, like that's really, really uniquely Fijian. And in my practice, like I work in performing arts and I teach in an acting school and an acting department. And I always try to remind students, particularly my students from the Pacific, like acting as a profession is not a European profession. Like as it exists, it's being taught as a Eurocentric model and framework, but actually like the way that we tell stories is that we constantly move between these characters and we, you know, like do the Foley, as you said, all the sound effects and all of that, like that history and legacy is there, you know, and that's what makes the way that we write stories and tell stories and embody stories really fascinating and magnetizing and hilarious, you know, because as you said, it's like you go all in, you know, like there's no 50%, there's no like 40%, it's like 150% when you're reenacting and telling a story. And that's and the relationship between, you know, the person telling that story and the audience, and like the, you know, like that's really important. People shouting back and responding and, you know, like shrieking of laughter, like that's really beautiful. Were you going to say something, Salote?
I was just going to say the sense of time that you were talking about, you know, it back then could be like 30 years ago or it could be last week, you know.
Yeah, that's so true. We're able to stretch our understanding of time because it is so fluid as well. Yeah, I appreciate that. And lastly, we're gonna head over to Risi. What is one thing that you love about the way iTaukei tells stories?
Oh, Vinaka, yeah, I think I resonate with what Tui was saying. Yeah, when it comes to storytelling, it's kind of, I like the when you said like it's not straightforward. You know, it's either you're, you know, whether you're listening, you know, you are also part of the whole talanoa, you know, in the whole conversation. And yeah, I love that. And then to answer your question, Emele, for me, one thing that really, something that I'm just so passionate about is the, you know, the language. Because, you know, for me, even though I was brought up as a fluent speaker, from both my mom and my dad. So my dad is from Yahweh district, so he has his own dialect. My mom is from Tahuki district, she has her own. So my mom used to kind of go between the two dialects. And I think I've mentioned this a few times to people that when my mother speaks her dialect, that means we have to run for your life because she's angry. So it's really, really beautiful, you know, to know that she speaks from the heart, you know, and that's the dialect, and she really means what she's saying. And so, you know, when I think about it and I look back and I'm like, wow, I never really took much notice of it when I was little, but when I got older, and then now that I'm overseas and I'm valuing the language much, much more. Even I remember my brother was asking me and said, you know, you've lived overseas, you know, for over 20 years, you know, but you know, you still want to do things in Fiji, and like, and I said, because I love it even more. And it's hard for some people to understand that the passion that I have, but I'm going to give you some examples as to why I said that. So for me, when I'm teaching the language too, because of course, Salote is one of my favorite students.
Your longest living student. We've been doing lessons for a long time. Needs extra work.
So one thing I noticed is that when I start teaching the language again, even I remember, you know, we've had some moments with Salote when I have that kind of, you know, I stop and I pause and I think of the word and I realize that one word has so much meaning in it. You know, so I have to say maybe Salote can remember some moments too, but for me too, sometimes when I'm teaching the class, I sometimes get more excited than the student because I'm getting those, you know, my brain is kind of making the connection. So to give an example, some of the elements of the voice vakaviti that I love are the Fijian idioms. And the, you know, the Fijian, what do you call the Fijian counting, not the Nduarotolu, the 1, 2, 3, the traditional counting, you know, Tinina Niu Sandona Ingali, you know, Tinina Tambua Sandona Wulo. They are all metaphors and they're so rich in stuff, in information. So for me, you know, when I get a spark in my head, I try to write it. And that's why as well, you may be thinking, That's why I have my talanoa program in Fijian, because a lot of people were asking me, why did you start your digital platform in Fijian? Why can't you do it in English? And I said, of course I can do it in English. I have the choice, but I deliberately want to go back to the vakaviti because I can see the beauty in the language. And every now and then, I have the English speakers come in, which I love, because more people can learn about it. But for me, the underlying reasons of making sure that our language is heard and the language is spoken and felt is key to how I love this vakaviti. So a quick example, if I can, Emele, is this proverb, Galova Wowanamoka. Galova Wowanamoka. So this is a proverb that talks about this the fish traps, that is made of stones, that usually in most of the islands, they have the fish traps. I think they have it in Australia too. When the tide goes out, then the fish are trapped in the moka. The fish trap is called the moka. So it has this deep meaning, which is used for teaching our children or telling someone that does something prematurely. So in that proverb, it says that you don't swim to the moka, because when you swim to the moka is underwater. It's futile to get anything. So you have to wait until the tide goes out, and then you go and collect your fish. The second one is to do with this, the kune kune naya loka nindilio. So this is to do with this bird, the Pacific golden plava. So it's the meaning is in it. So when I was growing up too, I love this day. And I used to wonder what the dilio bird looks like. And so when I started doing this, classes for children, and I started doing the research about the Ndilio, and then I told the children, did you know the Ndilio bird doesn't live in, they visit Fiji. They don't lay their eggs in Fiji, and that's why the proverb came to be. And then on top of that is a song. I think maybe Tui might remember this song, or maybe Salote Emele, but the first line goes like this. Dili Ndilio, Bukayawa Mai. See? Toto katunan raki. So for someone that knows the vakaviti, the answer is already in the lyrics of the song. Dili dilio bukayawa mai. So if a child is doing their research to find out what that idiom is, they just have to sing the song and know what it means, because the bird is flying from a very distant land. So I just thought I share those two examples, and the power of the language, and for us to value our language much more, and that's something I say to my students. You can learn Japanese, you can learn Russian, English, Spanish, you can any, but also if you're from Fiji, learn as much as you can if you have the ability, because there's so much richness and depth in your language as well, so that you can learn and appreciate the world that you live in. So there you go, Emele. I hope that that answers your question and gives you a little bit more on why I love the Fijian language.
Naka level. Teresi, is that song's on your YouTube channel, right?
Yes,
my family listens to that song. So I have heard that song, because my son loves all of your children's lullabies that you've put on your YouTube channel with your beautiful husband accompanying.
Yes.
So thank you, Naka. I'm so appreciative to all of you for your time and for sharing just a small, just a tiny part of, what Fiji means to you, what Fijian storytelling means to you, and your creative practice as well. I want to encourage everybody who's watching and listening to go and learn more about our culture and learn from iTaukei people, from iTaukei storytellers. You can find Teresi on Talanoa with Dr. T. As she said, she has her amazing platform there, digital platform, where you can learn from all different Fijians, iTaukei people from all over the world. And Tui, you can find with Tikon level. Animations and illustration, and keep up with the Solimbula project that Tumeli is also championing. And of course, Salote, I can't wait to see what happens with the triennial and your Billy, and I really wish you all the best, you and your team, with building that, because it sounds epic. And I know that as soon as I see it, I'm just going to feel like and back at home in Fiji, or at least in Fiji Museum. And so, yeah, again, Vinaka Level, thank you for your time, and what a treat. And thank you to Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts for giving us the opportunity to connect and share what we love about vakaviti, the Fijian worldview, and how Fijians tell stories. Naka.
Naka.